Hi, everyone, again. And thank you, everyone, for your patience as we got started. You probably saw us chattering on the back end of this. My name's Kristen Hancock. My pronouns are she and her. I am with Ecology. I am so excited that we have finally found a date to make this happen. If you missed the very beginning of this, I was sharing that this is my very first webinar being the host on the back end. I've hosted many a Zoom meeting. I've hosted many a live stream. I have never actually hosted a Zoom webinar. So first time for everything, I'm learning. I think that's a great theme for our session today. So welcome, everyone. The chat is open. Feel free to introduce yourself, say hi, let us know where you're from, what your favorite part of December is, how you're feeling, how things are going today. I want to start off with a moment of, I'll call it centering. We named this webinar something a little tongue-in-cheek. I thought it was a clever little getting giggy with it. I hope everyone knows the Will Smith reference song there. It's a bit of a funny tongue-in-cheek title. I also will acknowledge that this is a pretty important, serious, can be a heavy topic for a lot of people. I know our industry has gone through unbelievable change broadly in the last 2 years, I guess pushing 3 years, but also in the last few months with layoffs and just changes and reorganizations and mergers and all those kinds of things. So kudos to all of us for being here and for wanting to make sure that things are settled in our own lives. I want to say a huge thank you to all of the panelists that you see on your screen right now. The brainchild of this session comes from Jason Anthony and Ann Mellinger, who came to me and said, we've got this idea. Can we use Ecology as a mechanism to make this happen? And I was like, this is what Ecology was made for. So to Ann and Jason, Ann saying, it was all Jason. No, it was not all Jason. It was everyone is involved. We're all going to pass the buck. No, it was you. No, it was you. So the idea was, can we put something together to help people in our industry feel a little more confident in where things are going? We know that a lot of you have been through significant job changes. We know a lot of you are experiencing job loss or are a little worried about experiencing job loss, maybe in the coming weeks or months. And even if you are happy and secure in your role, we also know that you might just be interested in doing some side projects, some other freelance work, whatever that looks like for you. So the goal of today is not necessarily to do the big picture, long-term planning, like how do you set up an agency and, all that kind of stuff. The goal of today is to be able to get you started immediately with tangible tips and tangible tools for taking gig work, freelancing work, contract consulting, whatever you want to call it, whatever that looks like for you. That's what our goal is for today. So we've got a wealth of experts on this call as panelists. I am not going to do grand introductions for all of them because we would be here for quite some time. But you can see names and faces on the screens. We've got on your screen, sorry, we've got Jason Anthony, Andrea Greenhouse, Priya Bates, Guy Westermeyer, Greg Monaco, and Ann Mellinger all have experience, expertise, and also some interesting niche tips to share with all of us. So I'm going to go out on a limb.
Panaki.
Where's Panaki? You know why I forgot Panaki? Here's why. Because Panaki is to the left of me, and I went to the right and went down my screen like this.
You can't forget him.
Panaki,
Thank you.
It's just terrible. Okay, cool. I'm going to do my best to monitor all the things going on at the same time. So Godspeed to me. Couple of little housekeeping things. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that everyone who is a panelist on this call has no issue with anyone who is joining connecting with them on LinkedIn. So the LinkedIn, their LinkedIn URLs are actually on the Zoom registration page, and I'm sure you can search names as well, easy to find. Make sure, and this is my pet peeve on LinkedIn, make sure you put a note in the personal message thing, just saying hey, I saw you on this webinar. That would be awesome. Then at least they have a reference point for why you're wanting to connect with them. But by all means, connect with any of us. I'm going to ask everyone, attendees, panelists, everyone involved in this, we're going to have to be concise, which is difficult for us in communications, myself included. We've got a lot of ground to cover, and we have a lot of people on the call in now less than an hour. So we're going to be concise, and please don't take it personally if I'm moving the conversation forward, because we've got a bit of an agenda to follow here to make sure that we cover as much as we can. There's a Q&A. If you have specific questions, pop them into the Q&A section just so I don't lose track of them in the chat. That would be super helpful. If you don't want your name associated with a question for whatever reason, send me a message or send the panelists a message, and then we'll just read it out without using your name. That's totally cool. I'm going to try and avoid reading people's names anyway, just for that reason. If you are currently a freelancer or contractor, consultant, whatever, and you are not a panelist on this call, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, because I know there are also people on this call who are joining and can chat and answer some questions or connect with people that might be a help for that as well. And I have created a Google form. I'm just a woman of so many talents. Hang on, I'm going to pop this link in the chat. So I'm going to put a link to this Google form in the chat. The Google form allows you to submit your information if you want any or all or some of the people on this webinar to follow up with you after. So if you want to dive deeper into something with someone, or you have a specific question, or you are ready and able and willing to do some freelance work with them, this is the form that you're going to use. Again, you can also just connect with people on LinkedIn. That's totally fine. But I am going to copy this link and put it in the chat as well. And I have a feeling I can like pin something in the chat. We're gonna test this all out. Copy. Here we go. Okay. Google form. Here we go. Well, let's test this out. Let's see if I screwed this up too, or if everything's fine. Okay, so let us get started. The first thing that we want, when we had this planning call, one of the first things that we all wanted to make sure that we talked about was coping with layoffs. I, not so jokingly, but somewhat jokingly, tell people that the only reason I have never been fired from a job is because I have quit immediately before the firing has taken place. That is half a joke and also not a lie at all. It is absolutely serious. So many of us have been there. Jason Anthoin, you have been there.
Definitely multiple times.
See,
I'm still alive.
He's a pretty successful guy.
Well, I don't know about that, but I'm much happier.
Right.
Because
right.
I feel like I have control. I don't have to be beholden to anyone else.
Yes. Yes.
I have options. And that's what this whole thing's about.
Anyone else on this call has been part of layoffs, restructuring, downsizing, you call it whatever fancy word you want to be part of, right? So the vast majority of us have been in that situation before. There is light and life after those situations. As Jason mentioned, it's often a blessing in disguise. My dog has decided this is the time he's going to run around. Guy, jump in there.
Yeah, I just want to, I grew up on a farm, saw my dad work for himself. I went into big corporate America, Ford Motor Company, got laid off, and actually was going to leave anyway to start a company. I got laid off, and I was like really happy, but at the same time he was like, why would you leave the stability? And I'm like, because there really is no stability. I mean, it's kind of what Jason said. I now have control. And yes, I had the ups and downs of, even though I wanted to leave, I still at times felt angry later down the road, a week down the road, month down the road. You're like, man, why did they do this to me? But overall, 22 years later, it's turned out okay.
Love
it.
And
I mean, it turned out okay sooner than 22 years. I'm not going to wait 22 years.
Good point. Good point.
I finally got cable.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So let's get right into it then and talk about these ground zero, bare bones basics of what you need to do. Now, I know we're focusing largely North America. So if there are people from the UK or Europe or other countries, let us know in the chat. I think we're going to focus largely on North America. I don't think anyone on this call wants to speak to any business tax / registration logistics in other countries, because that gets to be a bit of a dicey situation. So we've got a few Canadians, myself included, and the rest people are US based. In terms of if you wanted to start tomorrow taking clients and charging for your work, what do you need to do from a legal standpoint to make that happen? Let's start with Canada first, because I feel like it's probably simpler than the United States. I will share my experience. I did consulting work for 1 year before I moved to the US. If you are doing consulting work and you are using your own name, now I was in Manitoba, you do not have to register as a business because you're using your own name. There's no confusion about who is running the business. Obviously, you have to claim your income. We're not doing any shady ass shit on this webinar. Whoops.
You have to
Andrea Priya.
Yeah, you have to register your business if you're making over a certain threshold.
Correct.
So you have to, if you're making more than 30K, then you have to register your business, because then you have to get a tax number and you have to collect tax and remit it to the government. But there's different models of companies. There's incorporated company, there's a sole proprietorship. So, the best thing to do is start off with a sole proprietorship and try and get that 30 grand in the bank. So then you can go and get your tax number.
And to add to that, here's a mistake I made that people can learn from. I did not make 30 grand in my first year. So that's a vulnerable point that I'm making, but I had already registered for a GST number. If you register for that number, you have to file it, even if you don't make that threshold. So my tip is to wait, because you don't have to file if you don't make that amount. So especially if you're doing like a side gig thing, wait to see if you make that threshold. Priya?
Yeah, I'd probably say the same thing. I actually did incorporate right away, and part of that was business and corporate leaders saying you want to establish your business as you want to give it a date of incorporation, and knew I was in it for the long term, and so it could be, depends on what you want to do. Totally agree with the the 30 grand thing, but I guess maybe I was a little bit more optimistic about getting there.
And you know what, Priya, fair point. I knew that I was going to be moving in the next year or two. So I was like, okay, we're just going to keep this as bare. I need to pay my rent. So I was probably in the same boat as a lot of people on this call. Like, I need to make money to buy craft dinner and pay my rent. And that was kind of the goal for that.
And in Canada, the type of work you do also determines what kind of company you set up. So I did initially a lot of government work, and so I had to incorporate as well, because they insisted on you being incorporated.
Oh, that's a good point too. Interesting. Yeah. From the US, anyone who remembers that day one of what you need to do, that bare bones to get started?
Yeah, I mean, I opened up LegalZoom.com and established an LLC, and it's still a great, easy way to do it, and an important thing to do in terms of protecting your own personal assets. A lot of companies now are increasingly just requiring it, including my own, that if you want to work as an independent contractor with a company, that you have that LLC established. It's quick and easy and pretty inexpensive.
Also, people sue a lot in America. So there's also this whole, so there's that whole thing.
That's that whole protecting the asset.
Right.
Exactly.
That's right.
Jason, you've been on your own for what, 20 something years?
I don't know, a very long time. When I first went on my own, I didn't do any of that. I just called a bunch of people I knew and said, hey, hire me, I can write. And I didn't have anything other than a checking account, a computer, and a phone. And that's perfectly fine. You can get started that way, especially if you're working with small to mid-sized companies that don't require you to be incorporated. They can pay you just as easily. You have to worry about your own taxes and your own income taxes and all those types of things. I agree with Ann. You're much more legally protected. Even if you're making a small amount of money, you're much more legally protected if you set up an LLC. If you do that at LegalZoom, it's like $50, $75 or something, and then you're good to go. But you don't need a whole lot to get started. And most times you're surprised that you have to get started because you didn't know your name was on a list. So you want to get started as soon as you can, and you can start this evening accepting money and doing work for money, and you don't have to get any of that stuff in place to do it. But it helps if you do.
Super helpful. Okay. I want to talk about also bare bones basics in terms of tools and technology. I think it can be overwhelming for people to think about, oh, well, I need to have this and I need to buy this and I need to have this software and I need to do this and all of that. Some of the most basic tools, keeping in mind some of them are free. Guy, did you want to jump in with some of the tools that you found useful, like day one, very early on?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to need some way to keep track of the money coming in and out, right? But you know, everybody might immediately jump to, I need to buy QuickBooks or FreshBooks or Xero or Zoho books. But in all honesty, you can use just a basic Excel spreadsheet initially. And just, I even have an example. If you'll open up sharing of a screen, I can show of just a way to set up a real basic spreadsheet, because I love spreadsheets. I'm the weirdo in the communications world. I'm the spreadsheet guy. Got to have one of us, right, somewhere. But whenever you get around to that, just let me know.
I've
But,
got
like,
it. I figured it out.
all right, cool. I'll share screen because, you know,
Please do, because I'm excited about this because I spent a lot of money on QuickBooks and now I'm like, I didn't have to spend all that money on QuickBooks.
yeah, you really don't. I mean, so I have my main company and then I'm also partial owner in a second company. And for the first 3 years of that other company, we literally just kept track of the income and the outbound rent, and, you know, just with this, like, yeah, hopefully everybody can see my screen. You know, just basic way of doing it. And then we would hand that off to the person who was doing our taxes. And it's just a check registry. And then we used for invoicing, if you're using Excel, and I'm sure, or Word or any of the Google products or Apple products, they have templates for invoices. You know, you don't have to be, my whole point is when you're just starting out, and if maybe depending on what your goals are, don't go invest a bunch of money and spend money that you really want to, you know, maybe need to pay rent. And then you know, if you do want to go down that path of some of the other options that you're going to have to spend money on, these are like 4 of the kind of prime ones. NerdWallet has a great article that kind of breaks out the differences on those. And then the other things that you're going to need, like you said, you know, you might be able to use Google or Microsoft or the Apple products. Of course, now we all have to have some virtual meeting solution, but another really key thing is how are you going to keep track of your time? Because that's important, especially if you're billing based on that. And again, you can either we use Harvest, but you could also, if you don't want to spend money on it, use Excel, use Google spreadsheets. And then, you know, there's a variety of free project management softwares that you can use if you feel you need that. And then, of course, file storage is huge. I mean, I think we all today are more used to everything being in the cloud. But when I started so many moons ago, that wasn't the case. And it was only after we lost, you know, a computer with a lot of files that I realized we needed cloud storage. And that was a new thing back then. But you learn that lesson once.
I will say too, Guy, if I jump on there, I'm not sure how many people, how many panelists here are Microsoft versus Google versus Apple. I mean, if for people who are just looking at getting started ASAP, if you're already using G Suite stuff, it's free. And is now, it didn't used to be, it now is totally compatible. You can still open Word docs and, you know, all of that with there. So down the road, yeah, it might be helpful to have the Microsoft Suite, but if you're looking at free software, in my opinion, if you're already using G Suite stuff, just stick with that.
Exactly.
I don't know if anyone else uses other stuff too, if anyone else is diehard into
G Suite, and then we moved to Microsoft 365 just because most of our clients were in. So it depends what your clients are using. It depends on, you know, a lot of things.
Greg, that's a good point too. Clockify for time tracking. That's good. Free. Everybody loves free.
It's really good.
Free is
really
good.
Detailed. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Okay. That's great. That's a super helpful tip.
And I was just gonna add on the Microsoft Office thing. If a client is requiring you to use it, you can also ask them for a license. Those licenses are not cheap to individuals. So if you just want to use G Suite to get started, and then if they want you in Microsoft, say, sure, happy to use it if you can give me a license.
Yeah,
that's a good tip.
Great tip.
The other thing to think about is if you're already working, like I worked for companies who had special deals for personal home use of Microsoft tools. And that's where I often bought at very cheap prices because you're getting the corporate rates there. So I'd always make sure that my laptop at home and everybody in the home had a Microsoft license while I was in-house working for those companies. And then that made it really easy. So start prepping now.
That's a great
Yeah.
point. I didn't know that they did that. I don't think I've ever worked at a company big enough to do that, but that's really
Yeah.
cool. I didn't know that they had those rates. Panaki, did you have something to jump in there?
Yeah, I was just gonna kind of piggyback off of something like Guy said, really about, I know a lot of like entrepreneurs, when you kind of start off, you want to get everything like set up right, like the office and the technology and all your marketing and websites. But in kind of entrepreneur, your goal is to sort of get business as quickly as possible. And so I'd say like, don't wait until like you get everything together to start talking to people.
Yeah, I think that's probably the best. I will say I don't want to say failed at that, but I'm very like, well, I have to get all the ducks in a row and have all the tools and all the software and all the branding and all of this before I start getting business. And then you're 3 months down the road and you need to pay your rent, which is
You'll never have all the ducks in.
well, that's also true. That's
like,
also
it's just
true.
never gonna happen.
My ducks are at a club right now in my head. That's what's happening. So the great point. So Greg, I love that you raised your hand as I was going to bring you into the conversation. Greg and I are very cosmically connected. Greg is, I'm going to say, the outlier in this group for the best reason. He is the only person on this call who is not, this is not an insult, who doesn't work in internal comms. That's accurate, right, Greg? Yeah. Greg is a phenomenal personal branding coach and marketing expert. And so that's part of the reason we brought him into this call, is to talk about all of these things. And my next question to you, but I'm going to let you bring whatever you wanted to bring to the table first, was about what do people need? Do we need to have a logo? Do we need to have a website? All those personal branding type of things before we get started.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. And I was going to amplify what Panaki said, because that's really where it matters, is the conversations. And in the spirit of what Guy was introducing here with a spreadsheet, what I help my clients do, I mean, it's all about building relationships. So look at your contact list, put them on a spreadsheet, and reach out to 5 a day and have conversations with them. And you can simply just send them an email, and you just say, hey, it's been a while. I'd love to catch up with you on Zoom for a quick 20 minutes. When can we do? And you'll be surprised at what happens. People automatically will want to start to help you.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't even have to ask for help. You can just say, hey, what's going on?
There's an interesting parallel between putting yourself out in the job market or consulting or freelance market and the dating world. And this is what I tell people. When you are in a place where you're finally saying, you know what, I'm available, people start coming in. It's the same thing. We can all, it's like a laughable kind of comparison, but it is true. If you are putting yourself out there as available, people will start having conversations with you. And I think that's what Greg's saying, like letting people know, hey, FYI, I'm doing this now. There are lots of times where I'm sure all of us have been in situations where you didn't realize that someone was doing their own thing because they didn't actually come out and officially say that. So having those conversations is super important. And do you need a logo, Greg Monaco? That's what I want to know.
You don't worry about any of the stage dressing right now. That can come later. Generate income, get yourself some gigs, get some momentum. And as I would say with most of us, you'll probably fall in love with that. And then at that point, you'll have the confidence to say, okay, let's start telling our own unique story.
Greg, I love that point about just getting out there and being disciplined about 5 people a day. That feels easy, and it is. A couple of, an hour in the morning, hour in the afternoon, whenever you can put time in there to do it. But I think a lot of people don't do it. To Kristen's point, I didn't even know that so-and-so was available because you're ashamed or you're sad or somehow I'm now less and I'm embarrassed and I don't even want to talk about any of that stuff. Forget it, man. Everybody's been through it. Everybody has felt that way. It's nothing to be ashamed about. Somebody else made a decision about you, not you. You don't have to let that be your burden. That's their burden. So just boldly go out and introduce yourself and refamiliarize yourself with your network. And to Greg's point, you'll be super surprised how people will be falling all over themselves to help you. They truly do. They want to.
This
The
is
other thing-
I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I just wanted to say this is such a good habit to get into, and I still do this today.
Mhm.
Too.
It never stops.
The other thing I was going to add is that the best time to connect with all of your executives and people that you know, HR leaders you work with on LinkedIn is when you already have a job, right? So if you're inside right now, regardless of what the future is, I would make a habit of connecting with people I know along the way. And so you've got this big network that's already there, and they already have a relationship with you versus it's been 5 years since we've spoken, you know, and that's really important. Think about that. Keeping up that reputation now versus planning for it when you need it.
Yeah.
Don't grocery shop when you're hungry.
Yeah. And I think also like the way you frame the conversation is you should approach it with curiosity. You're there to learn about what's going on. And that's where you spot the opportunities is by having a conversation, finding out what problems they have. And then you can say, well, I could solve that problem. So yeah, and when you reframe that conversation, it becomes a lot easier because it's not about you, it's about them, and you're not begging them for work. You're there to see if they have any problems that you might be able to solve for them. And it's a whole different conversation, and it's a lot more comfortable to do it that way.
That's right.
Absolutely. And somebody asked a question on the chat too, I think is really important because I know we're getting into like the topic of networking in a little bit later, but it is vastly important, especially like when you don't need it, right? Like I think you should be networking when you don't need it. When you need it, it gets really stressful and troublesome and anxiety prone. Like I think, when you're out there, when you need it, you're almost kind of going out there almost like you're hunting, right? For a gig or something like that. And that kind of almost puts you in this kind of like desperation area. And people don't like to buy from people who are desperate in that way. So like the more you come across as like, this is my expertise, this is what I do, and I just want to share that with you, I'd love to help you, type of thing is really key. And then that's what kind of like Andrea said, is like, how do we help each other as opposed to kind of keep asking? Because I think helping people has this kind of reciprocal thing. And just finally back to what Greg was saying and Priya was saying, right? Like it's just networking when you're going into your own business is an all the time thing. It's not something that you do and stop, because your income is going to be dependent on you kind of constantly talking to people. I think Angie Lindsay said a quote a long time ago, and she's like a really great executive recruiter. But she said that like the relationships that you make in the first half of your career become monumentally crucial for the second half of your career. And I kind of keep that in my mind. And the only kind of difference I would say is I don't think there's a first half and a second half. I think it's just constantly, portions that you're just every chapter, the people you've met in the previous chapters are going to help you into the future. So keep that in mind.
Yeah.
One quick thing, Jen had made a comment or a question around like, don't know where to start. People overthink kind of where to start, and that might stop you from starting. So don't. You could close your eyes and point somewhere and call that person up, because in my experience, you just don't know what conversation is going to lead to what, and that could come from anywhere. I have had some amazing opportunities come up from the least likely places, things that I cannot replicate. So keep that in mind, Jen, or anyone else who's kind of struggling to say, who should I call? Pick anyone.
Yeah.
I do think you need to sit down and think about what you want. Like you need to think about what you want to learn, what you want to do, how much money you want to make, how much risk you're willing to take. Am I willing to Do I want to be with one safe client who's going to pay me 220 days of the year? Or do I want to have 5 clients who are going to give me small jobs here and there? Like what, like really thinking about your lifestyle. If you're a young mom with children and you're running to the hockey rink, well, you're not going to be able to, dedicate nights and weekends. So really understanding it's a lifestyle choice. And it's also a choice about what risk you're willing to take, and ultimately it's really about what do you want out of this. So I think starting with a bit of self-reflection, because that also drives your business, like what kind of business you're going to be going after and how you have those conversations with those people in the network. Those are all really important to have that. And those things change. Like my business has changed. I've also been in business for 22 years and it's evolved as my life has evolved, as things have changed. And so you need to like recognize that.
And if your goal is to pay your rent, that's cool.
Yeah.
Was also my goal. My greatest accomplishment in my year of self-employment was not getting evicted. So
Right.
The one thing.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, there you go. The one thing that's really interesting is, when I talk to younger people, those that are just graduating from colleges and universities, and I usually ask the question, how many of you are freelancing or have a side gig or a side hustle going on? And I think that every single one of them, it's like at least 90% will put their hand up.
Yes.
Right?
That's right.
Everybody sees that, right? And so they're not afraid to try something. It's almost as if, part of it may be driven by what they need right now and the prices of things. And, they need to make extra more than their minimum wage jobs. But it really is interesting. It's because that gig economy is just growing.
Greg, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot here. You have a personal and professional tagline that you use that I love. And I'm just thinking, Anne put in the chat here about having a little elevator speech. Yours is even shorter than an elevator speech. It's like a little one-liner about magnetic stories, right? Can you share that?
Yeah. And I can share the little template here, but my one-line story is I help people tell magnetic stories so they can attract the work they love. So
Love it.
I'll type in the little formula here, but the idea is I help people tell magnetic stories. Telling magnetic stories is my unique gift. I'm a writer. That's what I do. The end result, I help people tell magnetic stories so they can end result, and that's attract the work they love. So if this is sort of like a little bit of a way to help you focus your storytelling when you're having conversations with people to keep yourself consistent and on point and focused about what's so great about you.
Awesome.
So I'll just put that little template in there and
Love it.
Maybe that'll be helpful.
I bet it will be. I've used it. I've gone through, Greg has a one-line story workshop he's done for Ecology actually a couple of times, and I've done it every time. I would do that workshop once a month, actually, if you offered it, because it's so helpful.
It's like life-changing.
It is. Priya, you mentioned, and Anne, you were nodding too, about so many people having side gigs, side hustles, whatever we want to call them. I'm curious from all of you, what you are seeing as the kind of work that is out there for people. So for folks who are on the webinar who are like, I want to get into this, I'm not really sure what is it? Is it writing? Is it, podcast stuff? Is it strategy? What are the gigs and the side hustles that are out there and available for people right now?
I think definitely for the young folks, especially if they've got some training in communication, they're also digital natives. So they're just so natural. So I'm seeing a lot of, like, even the high school kids are doing editing. They're doing graphic design. They understand how to build things in Canva. They know how to use the tools. Some of them know how to write. They can't grammar at all, but if they've gone through communications and PR training, they probably can. My kids cannot, but so there is a lot of it probably does start out very tactical, And so in the writing and creation space.
I think that's right. And I think just finding whatever that specific niche is that you want to really focus in on. And I love the way that the example that Greg gave, because it's so much about you're here to help. And I think as somebody who is seeking work and you may feel that sense of like, I need the work, I need the money. But by focusing on, I'm here to help you, here's my services and they can help you, is just such a nice reframing. And that is truly what it is. I mean, I think almost every single person on here has brought people to me just saying, hey, there's this person I know that if you ever need their help, look for them. So just really thinking about what you can do to help is a great framing.
Yeah. And I think doing what you love, is important. So maybe there's not a ton of writing work out there. There is, but if you love to write. And, I think there's that saying, like, do what you love and you'll be successful, but also understand what your weaknesses are and work on those too, because you never know, especially in your career, because our careers are long, where you might need to be able to develop a strategy, or you might need to be able to do something that's not in your comfort zone. So I think it's a balance of focusing on what you love, but also learning and addressing your weaknesses over time.
And also realizing that you can hire somebody to deal with those weaknesses, because I hate accounting. So, right. Like, so there are, just like you're providing your expertise, being able to build that relationship and that network with different skills of individuals, even in the communication space, actually allows you to get partners who you collaborate with in the future on projects as well.
So if I'm hearing that, I'm curious for Pinaki, Jason, and Guy being agency internal comms people, and actually it would be interesting to have Greg to have your input on this too. Are people, is writing a big thing? Like, is that an area that people could relatively easily find some work in right now?
Yeah, no, we struggle to find enough people to write. I mean,
okay, that's good to know. Is it technical writing? Is it creative writing? All of the above?
All the above.
It's strategic writing. All writing.
I think it's making the complex simple, no matter what topic it is. I think that's the key.
I think
knowing how to use
people out there that are not good writers, so they need help with that. At least for so many people who are not thoughtful writers. So just to be able to help, and even an editor would be really helpful too.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Well, there you go. You heard it here first, folks. Writing.
The other thing I wanted to follow up on what Andrea was saying is I also think it's important not only to find what you love, but also, even though you're trying to make rent, maybe, or maybe you're not, maybe you're just trying to add and start to build, you also can't be afraid to say no to something and define what you are and are not, because that gains you so much respect in conversations to say, wish we could help you, I can't, but I know this person named Priya who would be perfect. And giving also someone else a referral and helping solve their problem totally changes the dynamic, because it can't be, I think somebody said, you don't want to go into it desperate. You have to go into it that, we're trying to put good out there. And I think, like you said, community over competition, right? I'm just trying to help solve a problem.
Guy, I noticed you put in the chat, but it only went to us, about the farming and hunting. Can you share that with the group?
Yeah. Sorry. Apparently I don't know how to use the webinar feature.
It's good. I'm not the only one. Amazing.
Early in my career, I had a guy that had been in, had an agency for years, and he made a comment. He was always a hunter. He was always out there rubbing elbows, and almost sometimes came across as sleazy in my opinion, the way I operate. And he was like, "You're more of a farmer." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm out there having conversations, planting seeds every day." And it's more of a farming method of kind of what I think somebody said, right? Make 5 phone calls, figure out where you can be useful, have conversations. And in turn, those some days, some sprout a year later, sometimes some of them sprout 5 years later. But planting seeds, and it's just, I grew up on a farm, as I think I've already said. So, farming analogies apparently, but, planting those seeds versus hunting is just what was more natural to me.
Yep.
than a true salesperson, where I didn't want to feel like I was selling somebody.
Mhm.
Right.
And
That's a great point.
honestly, our whole agency operates that way.
Greg, did you start your career as a writer? Is that how you got started as well?
Yes, advertising copywriter. Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Very
Yeah.
specific then too. That's really
And-
interesting.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, it's sort of like the secret of that industry, of the advertising industry, is like there aren't good writers. I would say 95% of advertising is just retreads of old ideas. So if you've got ideas and you can write, you're gonna find work for sure. Just got to put your portfolio together.
Amazing. Okay. Now we've got a question that came in about determining rates, and do not fear, that is on our agenda. Of course it's on our agenda. So before we get into rates, because don't worry, we're not going to forget about the most important part of this. Curious about if people have had experience, again, thinking back to earlier when you were a freelancer yourself, what if are there industries to target? I know, Jason, you mentioned that there are times you've actually gone back to former employers and talked to them about working with them.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of times if you're in a situation where you've just gotten laid off, that means you're not there and they can't hire anybody else to replace you. And so you can turn right back around and contract with them as a consultant, keep doing the work. You're not at part of their headcount, so they don't have to worry about that. In some cases, you can make more doing that than you did as an employee. And sometimes there's hard feelings and stuff like that. Get over it. I mean, they're now a client, and who is more well qualified to do the job than the person who just did the job? So don't be shy about asking that, even in the exit process. Hey, I know I'm going to the house, but I can do stuff from there that I've been doing all along. We don't have to get married. We can just date.
See, the dating analogies continue, and you're nodding too. You had your first freelance client was your former employer. That's really funny.
Yeah, I decided to freelance after I had my son, and they wanted me to work more than I wanted to work, and I actually chose to leave, and to start freelancing. And freelancing for them, I felt like it might be a little awkward. It was amazing. It is that familiarity, and there's some sort of small shift in the power dynamic that also feels really great too.
I found that too. I had some experience with that where I'm like, I hated my job there. I don't want to work for them anymore, but it's so different when you're the contractor or the consultant coming in. It's way better.
Yeah.
Yep.
I was gonna say there's different ways to get work where you don't have to be the one knocking on the door. So you could work for one of us. We're knocking on doors. We need people to help. There are also big consulting companies and staffing companies that are looking for people part-time or on a contract basis. I did a lot of contract work where there'd be a big multi-million-dollar project. They needed a change management lead. I would go in and I would do it for 6 months, a year, and get the project done. So there's that kind of work as well. So there's different models of working. And we are going into a recession. I gotta tell this story. I hope you're not gonna cut me off, Kristen, but
Try me. Here we go.
Different industries thrive at different times in the economic cycle. And right now, there's a downturn in certain industries, but also other industries are thriving. And today I heard on the radio, it reminded me, one of the industries that thrives in a downturn is the lipstick industry or cosmetics, because people like the small joy of a lipstick or a small luxury costs, $15 or $20 or whatever. But there's other industries that thrive too. So when inflation is high or interest rates are high, then banking is a good place to be. So just really understanding what's going on in the economy, getting out of the space that we're in, the internal comms echo chamber, I've heard Kristen say, and reading the paper, what businesses are thriving, what businesses are laying off, and trying to identify the opportunities by understanding the business landscape is really, really important.
There's some points in the chat too that people have said about some leads on gigs. Thanks, Kelly, for that. I will also say something I've shared with people, being part of Ecology and leading that community. I often get people coming to me either because they're looking for work or because they are hiring. And one of the things I've started telling people who are in internal comms recently, and this is maybe more of a formal job thing than a contract thing, but I think the same thing applies. The jobs that are available right now, to Andrea's point, there are industries that can't hire fast enough right now. There are also industries that are downsizing dramatically. It's a very have and have not. The industries that are thriving right now, many are in the tech space, and the jobs that they are hiring for may not have titles that are what you would traditionally look for in an internal comms role. So for example, there are a number of software vendors in the internal comms world who are hiring right now, and they might be hiring roles of for people who are working with their clients who are in internal comms. So you are not going to be an in-house communicator, but your internal comms background is hugely valuable for that role. So sometimes it's a little bit of getting out of the traditional bubble of what those roles are called and what titles they are to look for the experience that you're bringing in those situations.
Not to mention the fact that because we're going to see layoffs, right? We probably will for the next 6 months. Those companies are also going to go, oh my goodness, we don't have anybody to do this, right? Because the one thing about so first of all, if you're an internal communication practitioner in house, start talking about what you do. Don't stay quiet in the background, because it's amazing how many, I've been around those reorg tables, right? And it's amazing how much they don't know that you do when you're quiet and just behind the scenes. So start bragging about it. But also, when they do lay off, they're still going to need communication in a hybrid world. So there is an opportunity. So I think that that opportunity for freelancers is going to grow.
I wrote a blog today. I published a blog today about what how internal communications can help organizations kind of weather the storm of a recession and the value that we bring. Yeah, so
there you go. Put the link to that in the chat, Andrea. That would be really helpful.
Okay.
Pinaki, your agency, Local Wisdom, has a specialty, I guess I'll say, but correct me if I'm wrong, in highly regulated industries. Is that something you intentionally set out to do from day one, or has that just evolved over time? And the reason I'm asking is I'm curious if people should be trying to pinpoint industries, or at the beginning, is it better to say, you know what, I'm going to try a little bit of everything and see what I like and what I'm good at?
That's a really good question. No, I don't think it was exactly planned. Like I didn't target this and it happened. We're in New Jersey, and there's a lot of pharmaceuticals and regulated companies where we are. So I think it was kind of factor of like location, and as well like similar stories. Like I was in this field before going off on my own, so already had the experience, and I could bring that experience to that industry. And so that's where it kind of started. So no, I did not. I don't think I planned it earlier on. Like,
okay, that's good. So then, see, there's hope for if you don't have a specific industry that you're in love with. That's cool. Just date them all. It's fine. Okay, we've got 11 minutes left, and here are the two topics I want to make sure we cover. I want to talk about working with agencies. So all of y'all panelists on the call, working with you. What does that look like? What's the best way for people to approach it? And we're not going to forget about the money piece of it. So, should I do a free for all? Who wants to take the first one? Jason. Yeah, Jason, go for it.
So I have a firm. We have 11 people. None of them are employees. They're all contractors. And some of them have their own business on the side that doesn't have anything to do with what they do with me and our clients. We like it that way. They love it. I love it. Clients love it. You don't have to go out and, to I think Andrew's point or Priya's point, you have to go out and sell stuff. You can work with people who are already selling stuff. They just need great people to help them deliver it. So we run that kind of model here that's different from how most agencies run. But despite that, most agencies always have a need for contractors and others to help them. So just wherever it is you live, there's 10 agencies in your town. 10 agencies need your help right now. I guarantee it.
And it doesn't even matter where you live. You can live anywhere now.
Yeah, remotely.
Right.
Yeah. Now I was going to say,
Right.
Guy and Anne, and anyone else jump in too, but Guy and Anne, I think you both have employees and contractors?
Yes,
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, we have both.
we have both.
and
Both.
contractors.
Oh, okay. Everyone's got, okay, cool. So there's a mix.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there
We
something?
even have a contractor in Paris. You know, I mean, so it doesn't really matter where you live,
Love it.
in our
Yeah.
view.
Yep.
I bet you have to visit them often. I would need to visit
I'm trying to
them.
figure that out.
Yeah,
That
I
needs
would
be
need
an
to
end of the
check
year
in on
trip.
them very regularly, a couple times a year, probably.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
and I'm curious from you, and I'm not going to ask anyone on this call, like, what do you pay? But what is the best way for someone to approach that conversation if they're looking for work through an agency?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I will say, and I counsel people on this a lot because I worked so long as a freelancer and I hire a lot of freelancers, is that rate, your hourly rates, number one, matter a bit, but not a ton, honestly, because at the end of the day, what it's really about is how long it takes you to deliver something, right? And so if an agency wants to pay you a rate that is a little bit lower than you were hoping, well, maybe it's just going to take you a little bit longer to get that done than if they were paying you more. You know, like, you're actually in control of the time and money. And I think that's what's really important to remember. I will say that as a freelancer, my rates were higher when I was working directly with a corporation. And typically the rates are lower when you're working with an agency. So if I have a really experienced freelancer, I'll say, what's your agency rate? So that is something to
Yeah.
keep in mind, that agencies can be a really great ongoing source of revenue. I always loved, as a freelancer, working for an agency because I got variety, I got a team, I got resources, I got all kinds of things, but it was a bit of a lower rate. So there is that trade-off. You know, if you, without knowing anything about anyone, I always just say somewhere around $100 is a great place to start, at $100 an hour. You know, some people below that, some people above that, depends on your exact field of experience and your exact level of expertise, but it's a good place to start. I don't know if my other colleagues would agree with that.
Yeah, what I really like to focus on is, what value are you bringing to me, to my company, and to my clients? Like, you know, you can have people who will charge $100 an hour and not going to deliver a lot of value in those 5 hours or whatever it is to take for the deliverable. But if the deliverable knocks my client's socks off, and I had very, you know, it didn't take me a lot of work on my end to get it where I wanted it to get to, then you're worth the money. But if it's not up to standard, if, you know, if it's poorly done, if I have to, you know, answer a million questions and you can't kind of work on your own, then I'm going to pay you less because it takes me more time. I mean, we all have to make money. We're you know, helping you understand how to make money, but we have to make money too. So yeah, and sometimes I guess the other thing is, working for, you know, someone like us, with an agency, you have the support, you have that second set of eyes, you have maybe a graphic designer, you have the technology. So it can really, taking a little bit less also means that you have more resources, both people and technology.
It also depends on how tight the project is or how many hours you're getting. So I've got a contractor who, you know, we started out on a 3-month contract on a change project. It was going to be 40 hours a week. So when he knew he was getting 40 hours a week at $90 an hour, that contract is now going on 2 years. Right, where he's, you know, so it's working out really well for him, right? And he's done a great job. And, you know, so we're starting to talk to them about raising the rate because the scope's changed a little bit, but because he's getting that, it might be very different if you're doing 5 hours of a really tight project. And then, you know, I know that Guy's going to talk a little bit about project rates versus other rates, but really trying to figure out, I think, Andrea, you said we have to figure out how much do we want to make. Right. And that, you know, we don't have too much time because that whole presentation worked out. But really quickly, I always think of, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? What do you need to survive? What do you need for safety net? What do you need for thinking you can value it? There, he's put it up there, you know, feeling valued and then feeling worth it. You may be saying, what else? Somebody like me, what are they earning? So I'd like to find out what that person's earning. They've got the same experience and skills as me. So I'll find that out. But then there's this really cool place at the top where you're saying, how much am I worth to the people that I'm helping? So I found that my rate started out, because I mean, I was a senior director at a big company, earned really well. That's kind of where I started at what I was making right now. And then as I started realizing what I'd offered to people, that rate has probably from that first time gone up like 4 times what it was when I started, because I started realizing the value I add. So I encourage people that I talk to set that rate based on, you know, asking yourself those questions about what do I want and what do I need? And then having a range that you're willing to take based on that, because it could switch. But then the other thing is this formula that somebody taught me, who was one of my contractors, and it's essentially your salary that you'd like and divide it by the days per year you want to work times the hours per day you want to work.
Guy
it's a
and
really
Priya, were
quick-
you having offline conversations and developing these slides here? Because they match up
We were,
perfectly, and I'm a
we
little
were. Isn't
We
that
were.
Guy? We
about-
had it all set up. We could do a whole seminar. Guy, we'll do one just ourselves sometime, just on rates. But it is a really good formula I did some calculations here. 200 days a year at 7 hours, 7 hours a day at $50 is $70K, right? So it gives you kind of an idea of what you can make depending on how much time. But make sure there's a couple things. Make sure that you charge the appropriate amount, because I think Guy and I were saying this, that it doesn't do us any favors by charging too little. Right. And we tend to undervalue ourselves. So
Yeah.
it's really important that you do that, and then be realistic about how many days you'll actually be working. Because what you don't account for this is the time you spend on administration, the time you spend on business development, the time you spend on branding, the time you spend going out there and networking and presenting when they don't pay you. So be realistic about how much time you're going to actually work.
Awesome. Okay. We could have a 7-hour webinar on this. I think we all know that, but easily. So I will reiterate, if you were not here at the very beginning, connect with any of us on LinkedIn. Please personalize the invite so we know that it's from this webinar, just so we know who's connecting. That's always a pet peeve of mine on LinkedIn. If you would like, I'm going to put this in the chat again. If you would like to have a follow-up conversation with any or some or all of us about something, to want to dive deeper, we are more than happy to do that with you. You can reach out individually. If you can find us on LinkedIn, whatever, that's cool. I've also done a Google form if it's easier. You can put your name, phone, what you're interested in talking about, all of that stuff, and then we'll make sure we get back to you. I'm going to ask every person on this panel for a 1-sentence closer. If for people who are joining us on this webinar, if tonight at 6 o'clock Eastern, they're closing their laptop, they're like, okay, I am going to get started. I'm going to start taking freelance work. What is 1 sentence that you would give them tonight so that they can get started immediately? Who would like to go first? Pinocchio, I was going to call on you anyway. Go for it.
So I'll say this, so we just talked about pricing and whatnot. When you put a number out there, you put the number out there and you shut the F up.
That's good advice. That's good advice. And it was 1 sentence. Good for you. Good for you. Okay, Jason.
Read
Oh,
this book
done. There you go. The Business of
down.
Expertise. Love it.
by
That's
David Baker.
David Baker. He's a good follow on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah.
Yep. Great thing. Oh, Lindsay's telling us everyone needs that book. Awesome. Andrea.
Do what you love and keep learning.
There you go. Love that as well. Priya.
I was going to say, do what you love as well. I think, find what you're really good at.
Okay.
And offer that as a skill. It really is. It's really joy, right? You want to be doing what you do and not dragging yourself every day. It's like what we're doing sometimes when we're inside organizations. We are going to have the power.
Yep. Amazing. Guy.
It might not be 1 sentence, so I might break your rule.
You're going to get kicked out.
I know, right? But know, like, to follow up on what Tanaki said, also make sure you know how you're going to get paid, and if possible, bill a percentage of it up front.
Okay,
Get them committed to the project as well,
good advice.
and make sure you have your terms all set. I'm a little bit on the legal terms part, so if anybody wants to follow up, shoot me a note. I'm
There you
happy to
go. Okay, and there
share
was
ideas
there
with
was a question that came in to us, just asking about rates in different markets and charging. And so Anne kind of put a thing in the chat about that as well. I will say, just as someone who has worked as in consulting Canada and the US, I know Pri and Andrea as well. I can't say that there's a dramatic difference between there probably are. Charge your rate, and like Pinocchi said, offer the dollar amount and zip it. Okay, Anne, advice, one sentence.
Recognize that you have value to offer. Position it as value and help.
Amazing. Greg Monaco's getting the last word, the last
Wow.
sentence.
Okay, my goodness. You're not selling, you're helping.
There it is, folks. I love it. Please, please follow up with any of us. There is going to be a recording of this. We will share that. And I will also maybe I'll do like a web page or something with all the resources that we talked about in this today as well. Immense gratitude to everyone on this webinar. I will also remind anyone, if you, for any reason, are experiencing job loss or finance is a challenge for you right now, I'm happy to offer, we have a gift of grace membership through Ecology that is 3 months free. There's no payment associated with it. No questions asked. Reach out to me. I'm happy to send you that link. Loved everyone being part of this. None of the people on this webinar who are panelists were compensated for their time today, which goes against one of our core values in Ecology. But I know everyone on this call can agree this was worth it. If we were all going to donate an hour of our time to help out with this, this was the time to do it. So hang in there, everyone. Enjoy the rest of this month. Reach out for however we can help. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Take care of yourselves.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Hi,
everybody.
everyone.